The day my father's estate attorney read the will, my sister leaned across the conference room table and told me I had 24 hours to clear my things out of Dad's farmhouse. My brother-in-law just smiled. That was 48 hours ago. They have no idea what I found in the root cellar. My name is Sylvia Harmon, and I am 38 years old. I work as a senior estate appraiser for one of the largest auctions in Nashville, which means I spend my days determining the true value of things that other people have badly underestimated. Old furniture, forgotten jewelry, hidden collections. My entire career is built on the understanding that the most valuable things in any room are almost always the ones nobody notices. I should have applied that skill to my own family years ago. My father passed away 11 days ago. The official cause of death was a fall from a ladder at his farmhouse in Leiper's Fork, Tennessee, a property his own father had built by hand in 1961. The county coroner ruled it accidental. A 64-year-old man doing repairs on his gutters on a Thursday afternoon, and he slipped. That was the story. That was the story my sister told at the funeral, dry-eyed and measured, while she squeezed my mother's hand for the neighbors and the cameras. I buried my father with an antique gold compass in the breast pocket of his suit. It was the compass his father had carried through Korea. He had pressed it into my palm on the last Thanksgiving we shared, right before I left for the airport, and he had said something I did not understand until 11 days later. He said, "Sylvia, the only person who can find true north in this family is you. Don't forget that when things get loud." I thought he was being poetic. He was always being poetic. He was not being poetic. The will reading happened on a Tuesday morning. My mother sat beside my sister in the front row. My brother-in-law stood near the window in a charcoal suit, already looking like a man who owned the room. He is a real estate developer based out of Memphis, the kind of man who buys historic properties and strips them to the studs and sells them to transplants for 3 times what they are worth. He had been trying to get my father to sell the Leiper's Fork farmhouse for 6 years. My father had said no 6 years running. The attorney opened the folder and my sister's world collapsed in total silence. My father had established an irrevocable living trust 3 years prior without telling anyone in the family. The trust named me as sole beneficiary of the farmhouse, its contents, and the adjacent 12 acres. Everything, the house my grandfather built, the land, all of it transferred into my name before my father's death, bypassing probate entirely and untouchable under Tennessee law. My sister's face did something I had never seen it do. It went completely still. My brother-in-law stepped forward and placed both hands flat on the conference table. He has very large hands. I had noticed that the first time I met him, 10 years ago, when he shook mine so hard my knuckles ached for 2 days. "Sylvia," he said, and the way he said my name made it sound like a minor inconvenience. "I am going to be straightforward with you, because I think that is the respectful thing to do. Your father was not well toward the end. The family knows that. When a man in declining cognitive health makes impulsive financial decisions without consulting his family, there are legal remedies. We have already been in contact with an attorney in Nashville who specializes in trust contests. If you are reasonable about this, we can work out an equitable arrangement. If you are not, this is going to become a very long and expensive process." He straightened up and adjusted his cufflinks. "You have until tomorrow morning," he said. "We would appreciate it if you had your personal belongings out by then. We are having an assessor come through at 10. My mother had not said a word the entire time. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the window and did not look at me. My mother has always been a person who stands near the fire without getting burned, near enough to stay warm, far enough to have deniability. I drove back to the farmhouse alone. I sat on the front porch for a long time looking at the hills. Then I went inside and made a cup of coffee, and I started to think clearly for the first time since my father died. As an estate appraiser, I know one thing better than almost anyone. When someone is hiding something valuable, they never hide it somewhere obvious. They hide it where people think there is nothing worth looking for. My father had worked in construction his entire adult life. He knew how buildings were put together. He also knew how to make them hold secrets. 3 years ago, right around the time he quietly established that trust, my father had spent 4 weeks renovating the root cellar beneath the farmhouse. He told everyone he was reinforcing the foundation after heavy spring rains. I was the only one who visited during that time. He showed me the new cedar shelving he had built along the back wall, floor to ceiling, beautifully done. He said, Good cedar keeps everything fresh. Remember that. I had thought he was talking about canned tomatoes. I went down the cellar stairs at 11 o'clock that night with a flashlight and his old utility knife. The cedar shelving ran the full length of the back wall. I pressed on each panel systematically, moving left to right the way I examine the interior of any piece of furniture I am authenticating. The fifth panel from the right gave a half-inch under my palm, not the creak of age but a deliberate, engineered movement. I found the release mechanism on the underside of the fourth shelf, disguised as a jar lid holder. When I turned it 90 degrees, the bottom three panels swung outward on concealed hinges. Behind them was a fireproof steel safe recessed into the poured concrete foundation, biometric reader on the left side, numerical pad on the right. My thumb on the reader, 6 digits on the right. I knew the 6 digits. My father had told me years ago that the most important number he had ever known was the date he first held me in his arms. November 14th, 1986, 111486. The safe released with a hiss of pressurized air. Inside, a military-grade encrypted external drive, a battered leather journal, and a single white envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. I took everything upstairs to his study. I locked the door, I plugged the drive into my laptop and entered the password, the serial number engraved on the inside of his gold compass, the one I had buried with him. I had memorized that number years ago without knowing why. What I found on that drive rewrote everything I thought I understood about the last 3 years. My father had hired a private investigator 18 months ago. A woman based in Nashville, licensed, experienced. The drive contained her complete investigative file, spreadsheets, scanned documents, photographs, and a final summary report dated 8 weeks before my father died. My brother-in-law had been stealing from my father's construction business for 3 years. Not carelessly, systematically. He had obtained legitimate access to my father's business banking accounts through my sister's shared signature authority on a joint account they had opened years earlier for family expenses. Using that access and a series of forged authorization letters bearing my father's signature, he had established 4 shell companies registered in Delaware. Paper entities with no employees and no physical address. He had been routing business receipts through those shells and redirecting the funds into a private account in his name alone. The total $2.3 million. My father had discovered the first anomaly himself, the way a man who has managed his own books for 40 years discovers things, slowly through numbers that stopped adding up. He had not confronted my brother-in-law. He had hired the investigator instead. He had spent 18 months building a case file so complete and so airtight that a federal grand jury could follow it without confusion. The journal was worse. My father wrote the way he talked, plain and measured, with long pauses between thoughts. He had suspected for months that my brother-in-law knew the investigation was getting close. He had written about a visit my brother-in-law paid to the farmhouse 2 days before his death. My brother-in-law had come alone, without my sister. He had walked the property perimeter. He had been particularly interested in the gutters on the north face of the house. The PI's final report included a photograph I almost could not process. My neighbor runs a wildlife camera mounted on a cedar post at the edge of his property line, aimed to capture the deer path that runs between the 2 farms. The camera is motion-activated and records to a cloud server automatically. The photograph in the PI's file was a still capture from that camera, time-stamped at 6:14 a.m. on the morning of my father's death. It showed my brother-in-law's black pickup truck parked at the south edge of my father's property, and it showed a figure in work clothes carrying a ladder around the north side of the house. My father had not been on that roof doing his own repairs. He had never gotten the chance. I sat in the leather office chair in my father's study for a long time. The room smelled like him, sawdust and coffee and the cedar oil he used on furniture he restored. I held the journal against my chest and I did not cry. I had cried for 10 days. The grief had spent itself and what was left underneath was something quieter and much harder. At the bottom of the white envelope, beneath a short letter that I will not share here because some things belong only to me, my father had written a phone number. Below it in his slow, deliberate print, FBI Field Office, Nashville, Financial Crimes. Agent Grayson. He knows what to do. I called the number at 12:30 in the morning. The line connected on the first ring. A man answered. His voice was flat and professional and completely awake. I gave him my name and my father's name. I heard him exhale, not in surprise but in the particular way a person exhales when something they have been waiting for has finally arrived. Mrs. Harmon, he said, we opened a preliminary inquiry into your brother-in-law's business activities 4 months ago based on a referral from your father's investigator. We have been waiting. We needed the drive. I told him everything, the photograph, the shell companies, my sister and her husband arriving the following morning with an assessor and a fraudulent access order. He was quiet for a moment. Keep them on the property long enough for us to arrive, he said. Don't sign anything, don't argue, just wait. I can do that. Mrs. Harmon, a pause. Your father was a meticulous man. What he put together gave us more than we could have built in 2 years of standard investigation. I want you to know that. I thanked him and ended the call. I looked out the study window at the dark Tennessee hills, and I thought about my father pressing that compass into my hand and telling me I was the one who could find true north. By 8 in the morning I had showered, dressed in the charcoal blazer I wear when I'm authenticating collections for major auction houses, and made a full pot of coffee. I was sitting on the front porch with a ceramic mug when their vehicles came up the gravel drive. My brother-in-law came first in the black pickup truck from the photograph. Behind him, my sister in her white SUV. Behind her, a man in a work vest carrying a clipboard. And behind all of them, a rented box truck that still had the moving company logo printed on its side. They had not come to negotiate, they had come to empty the house. My brother-in-law stepped out and looked at me on the porch the way a man looks at a traffic cone in his way, a minor obstruction he intends to move in the next 60 seconds. I'm glad you're still here, he said, makes this simpler. My sister stopped at the base of the porch steps. She held a manila folder against her chest. We have retained new legal counsel, she said, her voice carrying its practiced authority. The trust contest is being filed today. We also have a court-issued temporary access order allowing us to take an inventory of the property. If you obstruct that process, you will be held in contempt. She held the folder out. I set my coffee cup on the railing and took it from her hand, and I looked at it the way I look at every document that crosses my desk, carefully, completely, without expression. It was a convincing piece of paper. Someone had gone to significant effort. This is impressive work, I said. My brother-in-law planted one foot on the bottom porch step. Up close, in the morning light, he looked like what he was. A man who had convinced himself the property was already his and was impatient with the administrative delay. You're going to step aside, he said quietly. You're going to let the assessor do his job, and then you're going to call your attorney and tell him to stand down on the trust. Your father built a beautiful property, but it is going to be worth considerably more as a boutique residential development, and that is what it is going to become. I looked at him steadily. My father restored the original plank flooring in this house, I said. He did it by hand, board by board, over 4 months. He told me once that the only way to know if a board will hold is to put your full weight on it and wait. I looked down at the step his foot was resting on. I would step back, I said. He opened his mouth. The front door opened behind me. A woman in a dark tactical vest stepped out onto the porch. She held a badge wallet open at chest level. Behind her, 2 more agents came through the front door. At the tree line on the east side of the property, 3 unmarked government vehicles that had been parked along the neighbor's access lane began moving slowly up the drive. Sir, the agent said, addressing my brother-in-law, step away from the structure. The assessor with the clipboard took 3 rapid steps backward toward the box truck. Smart man, he got in his car and reversed down the gravel drive without a word and never came back. My brother-in-law's face had gone the particular shade of gray I had seen once before, on the face of a client whose provenance documentation I had just dismantled in front of a room full of buyers. It is the specific color a person turns when they realize the floor they thought was solid has been hollow the whole time. I don't understand, my sister said. Her voice had lost its courtroom steadiness. What is this? The lead agent stepped down from the porch and addressed them both. She said my brother-in-law's full name. She listed the charges one by one: wire fraud, financial elder abuse, embezzlement of business funds, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder in connection with the death of my father. My sister made a sound I have no words for. Not a scream, something smaller and more broken than a scream. My brother-in-law did not make any sound at all. He turned his head and looked at his truck, and I think for one moment he considered running. Then he looked at the agents positioned along the property line and he did not move. They walked him toward a government vehicle with his hands secured behind him. He looked back once, not at my sister, at the farmhouse, at the land, at the 12 acres of Tennessee hillside my grandfather had cleared by hand and my father had loved every single day of his life. I looked back at him and I felt nothing that resembled mercy. My sister stood in the gravel with her manila folder hanging open. The temporary access order slipped out and skidded away in the morning breeze. She watched the vehicle door close on her husband. My mother arrived 20 minutes later in a rideshare, wearing her good pearls, and she looked from the federal vehicles to my sister to me and she said, "Sylvia, this has gone entirely too far." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "He killed Dad," I said. Her hand went to her pearls, her mouth opened and closed. "We don't know that," she said. "The FBI knows it," I replied. "The wildlife camera from the Hensley farm knows it. The journal Dad kept for 18 months knows it. You can argue with me or you can argue with the federal government. I'd save your energy." My sister sat down in the gravel right where she was standing. Not dramatically, just down like a structure whose supports had been quietly removed. She sat in my father's driveway in her pressed slacks and stared at the middle distance and did not look like anyone I recognized. I looked at her for a long time. I do not know exactly what I felt. I know I felt the particular exhaustion that comes from finally setting down something you have carried so long you forgot it was heavy. "You can come inside," I said, "once, to say whatever you need to say before the federal transport leaves. After that, you leave this property, my property, and you do not come back." I gave her privacy. I stood on the porch with my coffee and looked out at the hills my grandfather had cleared and my father had loved, and I waited. 8 months later, the farmhouse was something my father would have recognized and been proud of. I had worked with a preservation architect, a woman my father had consulted years ago who knew the bones of the structure better than anyone, to restore every original detail he had protected his whole life: the wide plank floors, the hand-hewn ceiling beams, the stone fireplace he had rebuilt at 42 because the original mortar was failing and he could not stand the thought of losing it. In the 4th month, I started the appraisal work I had been putting off. Beyond the cedar shelving, behind the safe in the root cellar, there was a second door my father had never shown me. It opened into a climate-controlled extension he had built into the hillside over the course of several winters, a structure invisible from any road, accessible only through the cellar. Wrapped in custom protective covers and resting on pneumatic lifts, sat a 1969 Camaro Z/28 in original Fathom green, numbers matching. 44,000 original miles, documentation back to the factory. My father had been quietly restoring it for 11 years. Beside it, floor-to-ceiling shelving held 63 pieces of American folk art furniture he had acquired and restored over 30 years of traveling to estate sales across 7 states. A signed Shaker blanket chest, a painted Pennsylvania Dutch wardrobe, a matched set of Windsor chairs from a Vermont farmstead that made me stop breathing when I authenticated them. Total appraised value, $4.7 million. I sold 2 pieces, enough to fund the full restoration of the farmhouse exterior and establish an endowment at the county vocational school for students studying traditional construction trades. Everything else stayed where Father had put it, in the home his father had built, in the hills of Tennessee he had never once considered leaving. My brother-in-law awaits trial on all charges. 3 separate motions to suppress the investigator's evidence were filed and denied. The wildlife camera footage was ruled admissible in federal court last February, and I was told the prosecuting attorney described my father's investigative journal as one of the most thorough pieces of documentary evidence she had encountered in 14 years of financial crimes prosecution. My sister filed for divorce 3 weeks after the arrest. She did not testify against her husband. She did not defend him either. I do not know what her life looks like now. She has not reached out, and I have not reached out to her. My mother calls occasionally. I answer sometimes. Some bridges do not burn all at once. They just slowly stop being used. The farmhouse sits exactly as it has always sat, at the end of a gravel lane in Lapers Fork, Tennessee. In the mornings when the light comes through the kitchen window at a low angle and hits the plank floor the way it must have hit it in 1961, when my grandfather first laid those boards, I think about what my father said. The only person who can find true north in this family is you. I found it. I am staying exactly where I am, and if you have ever had someone underestimate you so completely that they handed you the exact tools you needed to dismantle them, tell me in the comments. I want to know I am not the only one. Subscribe, because what comes next is only just beginning.